So let me ask you a question, because
Yes,
you have quoted Dr. King very beautifully in our conversations, and Martin Luther King Day is approaching. The year before his death, I'm told that Dr. King was planning a massive Holy Land tour.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
To lead hundreds of black clergy and lay people to Israel and Jordan.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
They were canceled. Those plans were canceled, I believe, in the aftermath of the Six-Day War in 1967.
Yes, sir.
Can you give a little more insight into Dr. King's relationship with the Jewish people and with the state of Israel?
So in my book, not a shameless book plug, Zionism in the Black Church, right? You can go to ibsi.org. You can get the book there.
Zionism and the Black Church.
Yes, sir.
Just letting everybody know.
Yes, sir. You can go to our website, ibsi.org. You can get it's on Amazon and everything. It's also an audio book version.
ibsi.org, everyone.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
I talk about it in detail. As a matter of fact, I even have a picture of the letters between him and Ben Gurion. Right, Ben Gurion at this point is the former prime minister, but he's still very much involved in everything. And I mean, Eshkol is the prime
Levi
minister.
Eshkol was the prime minister.
Yes, so he's actually writing back and forth. There's no emails back in that day, right? But we have the actual letters right? Yeah. Stamped and everything, going from Tel Aviv to Atlanta and everything. Like, that's amazing. Even those letters, you can feel the warmth, right? Ben Gurion says, "Hey, so excited to know." Ben Gurion uses the term the mass pilgrimage of the American Negro to the Holy Lands of Israel and Jordan. He uses that term because he's saying how excited he is. And Dr. King writes back to him, "Yeah, we've been traveling the country." He's using it both as a promotion for goodwill and everything like that. And they're also doing it as a fundraiser, right? With Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They said, here's a way we can continue to further these relationships with Israel and Jewish people, as well as, raise funds for our organization and everything. Mm-hmm. And so he's doing, I tell people, before the popular thing of Christians traveling to the Holy Lands, Dr. King was getting ready to kick it off in 1967, right? Wow. Isn't that amazing? I worked for 7 years for Christians United for Israel, leading pastors to Israel. And every time I had a group of black pastors, it was never lost on me that he died before he could do what I was actually doing, right? Wow. It's just, so but
he was planning it already.
He was planning it, right? He was planning it for November 1967. We even have the dates. They actually said it, right? Of course, these letters that I'm referring to were in the spring. January, February is when Ben Gurion and Dr. King are writing to each other. Of course, what happens in June? The war. Of course, Israel wins the war. It's very controversial because now, even to this day, we talk about the 1967 lines, right? Israel's being denounced as a settler colonial, the whole thing, right? There's pressure on Dr. King to weigh in. All of these things are happening in real time. So, of course, the trip gets pulled back. There are anti-Israel people who tried to use that, and I don't refer to this in my book, but another article. They try to point to the fact that he pulled back on the trip as some sort of denunciation of Israel. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. He was concerned about the controversy. He was concerned about what was actually going on, but it wasn't a matter of him condemning Israel.
Was he concerned for safety?
I don't know that it was safety. I think that what was happening is that in the fog of war, one of the things I remind people of is that because I refer to other documents in there that's actually talk about some of the conversations that he had. There's recordings because the FBI recorded them, right? It's back to the whole security state, but it's police state. But he's saying that he makes a statement that I don't want to be perceived as basically, I'm kind of after him paraphrase, endorsing either the Arab or the Israeli side, not in terms of Israel, in terms of war. He's saying there are things that are happening subtly here. He said that I'm still kind of sorting through. He never condemns Israel. This is like, you'd have to imagine that in 1967, there's no internet, there's no email. So you're getting information.
Do we have anything that he said about the 67 war?
Oh, absolutely. So what's happening, Rabbi, that you asked that question, the most prolific pro-Israel statements that Dr. King makes are after the war.
Of 67.
Yes. And one of the reasons why he's making those statements is because of how Israel is being attacked. So the war happens in June of 67. Fast forward to spring of 68, because in my book, I talk about what happens in July of 67.
Because it's interesting. You'll find this interesting as a preacher.
Yes, sir.
As a religious person.
Yes, sir.
What happened in the Jewish community throughout the world.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Was that the Six-Day War created a certain Jewish pride.
Yes, sir.
I'm in the business of what we call Jewish outreach. I'm I don't have like a classic, synagogue congregation of people who are just sort of, already believers who want to belong someplace. Right. We're really trying to engage the less affiliated. That movement, which is called in Hebrew, it's called the Baal Tshuva movement. The Baal Tshuva means to return to your roots, your spiritual roots. That Baal Tshuva movement in earnest began, if you ask most outreach professionals, with the 6-Day War. Why? Because the 6-Day War inspired such pride within Jews, because they were digging trenches. They were preparing for another Holocaust in Israel. They were digging trenches in Tel Aviv for burials, because they expected such a, there were 465,000 troops amassed on all of Israel's borders in the north and in the south, from Syria and Egypt and Jordan. Then got involved. They had to fight a three-pronged war against three other countries, and then they had behind them dozens of other Arab countries. And the United States, by the way, was not very supportive of Israel. It was France at the time.
Yes, sir.
So people were really nervous, and all of a sudden, it's like a miracle happened. We not only defended ourselves, but gained all this territory, which we took as a buffer, basically. And that inspired Jews everywhere to start wearing these. Like my dad grew up in Pennsylvania, would never think in the 1950s of wearing 40s, 50s, wearing a kippah publicly. Most Jews did not wear a kippah publicly until after the 6-Day War.
Wow, that's
people started feeling. So I'm just curious of curious of Dr. King's. But you're saying a lot of Dr. King's positive and pro-Israel statements came after the 6-Day War,
and for that reason. So to your point about the war, also, as you know, for those listening, that Israel launched the preemptive strike against Egypt because of the formidable surrounding of Israel. Israel then takes one thing I love about that story is that Gamal Nasser and his leaders were basically toasting each other right before. Some accounts say getting pretty sloppy drunk because they were so, hey, we got this. Yeah. And Israel took the advantage of that. Some people twisted that and said Israel started the war, right? So all these things are being twisted around.
Well, I think this is, in terms of education, I know you're so devoted to educating and clarifying. It's so important for people to know that hundreds of thousands of troops were amassing around Israel unprovoked.
Right.
Exactly. Israel didn't do anything to instigate this massive buildup along the north from Syria, Egypt, and Nasser was the most belligerent anti-Semitic Arab leader.
Yes, sir.
And I'll tell you something else people don't know either, which is really interesting. I don't know if you're aware of this. The CIA communicated to the Mossad.
I did not know that.
That if Israel would shoot the first bullet, that America could not stand behind Israel.
Wow.
Knowing full well that all Israel had was the element of surprise.
Exactly.
Because they didn't have the armaments, they didn't have the numbers, and Israel had to choose between going at this alone or having the United States, but then having to wait to be attacked.
Rabbi, don't get me started on the DOJ and then the State Department, because and that's amazing that you just said that. And it's just the reason I'm smirking is because this is the same FBI and DOJ that was actually surveying Dr. King and harassing him. But that's another conversation for another day, right? So to your point, and those who are listening to this, you put this all together. When Dr. King said, and I quote, "I see Israel, and never mind saying it, as one of the great outposts of democracy in the world and a marvelous example of what can be done, how a desert land almost can be transformed into an oasis of brotherhood and democracy. Peace for Israel means security, and that security must be a reality." Full stop. He says this on March 25th, 1968. Why is he being so vocal? Why is it, even when he said that Israel has the right...
What impact, I'm just curious.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that quote is just so powerful.
Yeah.
What kind of impact did that have internally within the Black community?
Well, what he was doing, and he says this himself, I write about this in my book, and I actually quote, for those, whether you read the book or quote the other source material, the rabbinical.assembly.org. This was at an event. He was the honored guest at the 68th annual Rabbinical Assembly Of course, Joshua Heschel was there, the rabbi. So he's actually the keynote speaker, right?
So
And
the
this
Rabbinical Assembly is the Association of Conservative Rabbis.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So he's there speaking. And the subject wasn't, we have that, so you can go on rabbinical.assembly.org, ladies and gentlemen, type in Dr. King, boom. It's a 13-page document. We have everything that they, at least in that transcript, we have everything they talked about. And it wasn't just about the Israeli-Arab conflict, but that was a large part of it, right? So in answer to your question, he was only reiterating what he said himself was the opinion of the vast majority of the civil rights community. So though he was the mouthpiece, if you will, he wasn't speaking out of turn. The vast majority of the both civil rights community.
It wasn't considered a controversial statement.
No, it was considered controversial only in that now you're having this, okay, history lesson, everyone. This is 1968, right? The PLO is born in 1964.
Right.
Who takes over in 69? Yasser Arafat. What's the first thing that he does? He goes to the Black Panthers, to Angela Davis. Why is he selling this thing to young black civil rights leaders? He's trying to sell his From the River to the Sea as a justice issue. Marginal then, what we just talked about before in the whole the leftist thing, no longer marginal. It's now being taught in schools, right? What was he saying? Israel is, he wasn't using the word apartheid at that point.
But the same
idea. It's settler, colonial, Zionist, or imperialist, and that rhetoric, especially after the 67 war, what you're describing as the Jewish pride that ensued after that war, what Israel's enemies did was use it as proof that Israel, colonizers, imperialists, none of those things are true.
He starts getting the world to see the Palestinians as an oppressed black people, if you will.
He was nothing if not relentless. And again, for those who don't know, the KGB is actually who birthed the PLO. We have all these documents as well. It was born as a disinformation campaign. This does not mean that the Palestinians aren't a people, for those who might get upset. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that this was formed.
Yeah, we know the Soviets were funding the Arab League.
Absolutely. And many people aren't aware of that, Rabbi. They don't understand the Soviet connection to what was actually going on here for their own purposes, right? And Yasser Arafat becomes one of their puppets. And what does he do? He goes straight to the black community. Why? Because, especially in terms of Black America, that group represents from slavery to freedom, justice. Of course, there's a relationship.
So let me ask you just a moment.
Sure.